Anxiety has a way of weaving itself into our bodies, brains, and lives. Struggles with anxiety often begin in childhood and, by adulthood, can become firmly entrenched in our lives. With many mental health issues on the rise, from anxiety, depression, and chronic stress to suicide, it's time to pause to find actionable strategies to help us diminish life's stressors and cope in healthy ways. The more we destigmatize mental health problems by sharing our stories in supportive environments, the more we can find the path to well being. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life question. I feel really alone all the time, even when I'm with my friends. When we go out together, I feel super anxious and isolated, like there's a wall around me that keeps getting taller. I drink to help with the anxiety, but it's always there anyway. I feel defective and can't share what's happening with anyone. They wouldn't understand. Can you help? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Lisa Sugarman, who will be sharing her expertise as a mental health advocate, loss and grief counselor, columnist, storyteller for the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI. Lisa is also an author, crisis counselor for the Trevor Project, and so much more. Welcome to the podcast, Lisa. How are you?
Hi, Carla. I'm great. So happy to be here with you.
It's wonderful to share time. And I know we've intersected before because you, for a period, focused on books on parenting and anxiety and in parenting and all of these wonderful topics. Yet I realize your life has also taken a very interesting shift, as lives sometimes do. And so before we launch into the listener's question and where you are now, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you you?
Oh boy, that's a big open question. I think, well, one of the biggest things I think at this point in my life that makes me me is that I'm the mom of two grown daughters. Now, it's hard to believe sometimes that they're grown and in their mid and late 20s. I'm a wife to the the boyfriend I had in high school after all
Oh,
these years. Yeah,
my.
that's a very special distinction that I have. I'm an advocate, like you said. I'm a crisis counselor. I'm a champion for mental health. I'm a lot of different things, but I think what I am now in my life, more than I think I've ever been, is someone who's just trying to live really authentically and really vulnerably as a way of, I guess, encouraging other people to do the same, because there's a lot of power in that.
Thank you for sharing all of that with us. And so let's launch into, I like the part where you're talking about the vulnerability, the authenticity, because I share that with you. Living vulnerably, living authentically, what other way is there to live, right? So
Right.
let's lead for just a minute before we get into the heavier stuff. For our listeners who might not know what you mean by vulnerability, I know some people think being vulnerable means that you go out and you share your story with everyone, everywhere, no matter who's present, and you just gush at the seams with whatever's happening in your life. Could you explain what your definition of vulnerability is?
Sure, sure. So, I mean, I won't lie. I definitely, as a content creator, I do share what I'm thinking or feeling or what I'm working on with the world quite often. That's what I do. And I do it in lots of different formats on lots of different types of platforms. For me, being authentic, being vulnerable is more about just showing up exactly as I am, wherever I am. It goes way beyond being open, being honest and transparent about your life, about the things that you do, about the belief systems that you have. It's more, for me, it's more about what you see on the outside matches what exists on the inside for me as a human being. And it also means being open about the lived experience that I have. And I have, I mean, we all have our own different types of lived experience. For me, I have a lot of experience with loss, with grief and loss that I know you and I are going to talk an awful lot about today. I have a lot of experience with sexuality and having come out only a few years ago as a pansexual wife and mother of two grown daughters. So I've been really in the habit of keeping what's on the inside as close of a match to what you see on the outside as possible. So that's what I mean by being vulnerable.
Okay, so if I'm getting you right, we're also blending authenticity in there. So the
Very.
authenticity is an integral part of your vulnerability, being authentic and then being willing to open up all of those parts of the self
Right.
to in ways that feel right and appropriate to
Mhm.
you. I
Exactly.
love that. I love that. So, for our listeners who might not understand what pansexuality is, brief description, please.
Yeah, of course. So for me, for anyone who identifies as pansexual or bisexual or um, asexual, I mean, every term has its own little nuances, and most people understand that. I take bisexuality as an example. It means having a physical attraction to more than one gender. It doesn't just mean men and women, it means more than one gender. And you extend that a little bit further in pansexuality, the way that I personally interpret it, because we all have our own little micro interpretations that maybe make it a little bit different for each of us. But for me, it means that when I'm connecting with someone, I I can connect with someone both emotionally and feel also a physical attraction to someone regardless of their gender or the way that they show up in the world. If it's male presenting or female presenting, or they're someone has a different sexuality altogether than what would be considered to be, a stereotypical cisgendered gender sexuality, that doesn't change my attraction. My attraction to someone isn't just physical, it's also emotional. It might be in some cases spiritual, it might be um, very personality driven. It might be just a vibe that I feel from someone, but I know that I have the capacity as a human being to be attracted to someone, um, regardless of their sexuality and gender.
I love that definition because it really opens it up to noticing that sometimes we do feel inexplicably drawn to people. Has
Mhm.
nothing to do with gender. We're just like,
Right.
oh my goodness. So yes, thank you for sharing that definition. It's very, very beautiful and also a lovely example of your vulnerability and
Right.
authenticity. So let's go for a minute to our listener's question. This individual, don't know the gender, who really lives in this chronic state of anxiety. And as you and I both realize, and our listeners likely realize, anxiety can be so pernicious
Mhm.
that it can be fairly light at times. For some people it's fairly light and passing. For other people it grows over time. It can lead to agoraphobia. It can lead to really feeling stuck in life. It can lead to panic attacks. It can lead to and or even co-occur with depression. It can even become so overpowering that it can lead to suicidality and even suicide.
Mhm.
And often, you're the expert on this, but when the people that I've worked with, they often, it's very much fits with what this listener is reaching out about. It can become such this like vice grip on the person that they feel as though they can't go out in public into any social situation without having the social lubricant of some form of alcohol or weed or something on board to make them feel as though they can be authentic in their own skin, safe in their own skin. What do you think about that? What's
I think it's a hard position to be in. I think that anxiety is such a relative thing, right? It's like you said, what might not even phase you or phase me in the least bit could be completely incapacitating to somebody else on a different level. And I think it's so subjective and it's so personal. But I think that it's very real. Like if in your mind you're feeling like I take the in the case of this particular person, if they're feeling incapacitated or isolated or like there's some kind of a barrier between them and the rest of the world, like that's valid. That's valid. And it has to be treated as though it's valid. And I think it's a hard way to live because then I would imagine you're feeling like you're just never fully connecting with the world around you or the people around you. And, almost like you're living, I would imagine it would be like you're kind of living in a little bit of a bubble and there's no way to fully connect with the people in the world around you, and that's got to feel really really isolating, being potentially being in a crowd of people, maybe people who you even know and know well, and still not feel like you're connecting with them on the same level. That's got to be really hard, and it's no wonder that somebody would try to leverage something like alcohol or weed or some other kind of agent to somehow, I guess, make that connection easier to form or help to tear down that barrier a little bit. But I feel for the person, I really do. And I don't think that there's any quick fix to something like that. I think in terms of, where do you go when you're in that situation and when you're feeling that way, I feel like it's probably a baby steps situation where a big part of what I think I would suggest to someone if I were having a conversation with them is, first and foremost, pick the handful of people who you believe you are the closest to, who you feel safest with, who you feel most authentic around, and and maybe start there. Start by sharing how you're feeling and maybe being a little bit open. And we're talking a lot about vulnerability today, but maybe acting a little bit vulnerable and expressing that and see what comes back to you, because they might be surprised. They might be surprised to know that they're not alone and other people feel the same way. And if they do, what do they do about it? People have a very outward facing persona and people have a very private persona in a lot of cases. Sometimes people match inside and outside, and sometimes they don't. I think more often than not, people don't. So I think starting there and being open and honest about how you're feeling with people you can trust might lend itself to some interesting answers.
Thank you. You already got to some of the points I was going to bring up by offering such a comprehensive and beautifully grounding response. And I love that you emphasized the part of talk with people you can trust, people you feel safe with. Because I think, in fact, it was just yesterday I was working with a client who said, I learned that every time I shared, I was sharing with people who would criticize me and attack me. So then I feel worse and I
Mhm.
felt more alone and I felt this and I felt that. And so we can see that a big part about, and it's the sad truth, not everyone is safe to be vulnerable with. We
Right.
always want to be as authentic as we can be, but we do have to be judicious about who we're vulnerable with, because
Mhm.
if we have people in our lives who are going to gaslight us or criticize us or abuse us in any way for sharing our true selves, it can certainly increase the anxiety, the stress, and make it the mental health issues become amplified. So finding that safe place, and I also love how you focused on baby steps, because sometimes in mental health people think, oh my gosh, I have to make these big leaps. And as you know and I know firsthand, mental
Mhm.
health does not improve in a big leap. It's not take one pill, go to one session. It
No.
is, hey, if you need medication, it's still going to be a journey because you want to address what's underneath, right? So that maybe at some point in time you won't need the medication, possibly. But also addressing those issues can take a long time and can even be a lifelong journey.
I think it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? I mean, not to oversimplify it, but I feel like that's kind of what we're dealing with here. It's never most things of real substance. And when you're talking about, how you engage with the world, that's pretty substantive. And it's not going to happen overnight. But lots of little micro changes combine to create big change. And that's what we lose sight of. I know I lose sight of that all the time. And I have to remind myself that making little strides, taking, like I said, those little baby steps, it's still forward motion. It's still progress. It's still taking you to that place that you're trying to go. It's just a different pace. And sometimes taking our time and being really intentional with the things that we do or the things that we say or the positions we put ourselves in can lead to the biggest change, I think.
I 100% agree with you. And you made me think of a women's group I was running. And it's one of the things I love about group work and working with groups, because sometimes when we're on our solo journey, we don't see those baby steps that are having a snowball effect in our lives. And especially in group work, other people become your witness. And I'd have women come in and they'd say, I'm not changing. I feel really stuck. And I would leave it up to the other members of the group as the facilitator. I would sometimes watch and see what would happen. And one woman would invariably step up and say, I remember you when I first came to group, or when you first came to group, and my goodness, you have shifted, you have changed, you have. And then one time a woman came in and she said, I realize now, and she wanted to share this with the group, she said that my journey was like a large ship,
Mhm.
and my nose was pointed at one shore. And I couldn't tell because the turning from one shore to another
Mhm.
was so slow that it was only much later that I was able to look back and go, whoa, I used to be pointed at that shore, and now I'm pointed toward the open sea. And
Mhm.
it was just such a beautiful image that we were all able, just a beautiful metaphor. And that is how the work with any mental health issue can really be something that takes this long, tiny baby step progress. And sometimes we wake up just one day and go, oh my goodness, I responded to that situation differently. Or this time when I went out, for our listener's question, he or she, they may find at some point that they say no to going out. Maybe
Mhm.
that's the baby step. Maybe
Mhm.
they just don't want to go out. Maybe they want to have one person come in instead, or have nobody come in and spend the night in reading a book. And all of those, listening to the self, like, oh, what do I want tonight? Do I want to go out? Maybe I want to listen to my anxiety and stay in and do some yoga or some reading or go to sleep or take a shower or take a bath. And I think all of those, when we start listening to the self, because I'm a believer that anxiety is a messenger. And all too often we shut the door on the messenger and we don't want to listen to it. We just respond to it and say, let's cut it off. Let's
Mhm.
not be anxious. When if we slow down, anxiety has a lot to teach us. In fact, that was my first book, was what we both have experience, writing books. And that was my
Mhm.
first book, Joy from Fear, is learning to listen to that fear, to that anxiety, because it does have a lot to tell us. It can be a big motivator. So what would you think, for the individual who wrote in, what would you think, with all of your experience, that anxiety might be saying to this individual?
What comes up for me, and it started coming up while you were giving the analogy of the ship, has to do with our social battery, because we all have a social battery. And I have a YouTube channel and a series, a video series called the Suicide Survivor series that I put out new videos every week. And just last week, I did a video about our social battery and how some of us have a longer lasting battery than others. And it's not really, doesn't really have anything to do with agoraphobia necessarily, but it just has to do with just plain old comfort level. The fact of the matter is, we are not all wired equally, and what works for you might not work for me. And I think a big part of all of this, understanding who we are and how we function in the world, is really looking at where we're comfortable and where we're not comfortable and why aren't we and why are we, and stop comparing ourselves to the people around us who may behave very differently in situations that that are different from the way that we would behave. And I would just say that I really think in this case, it might have a lot to do with this person's social battery being low, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I would say maybe take a step back and say, okay, what situations do you find yourself in when you are comfortable? Is it just maybe with one other person? Like you said, maybe have one person come to you, or maybe just go out and meet one or two people at a time. Is it when you're in a big gathering, at a big event? What are your triggers? Where's your threshold? And then act accordingly. And it could really just be a matter of paying closer attention to when your battery feels drained, and respecting that and honoring that and saying, okay, so I'm not going to put myself in that situation right now because I know that's not going to be good for my headspace. And that might be a good way to think of it, and a good place to start, by just kind of evaluating, like, where am I okay and where am I not okay and why.
Thank you for drawing attention to the social battery because often, and I like it also through the lens of introversion, extroversion, and in the middle we have the omnivert or the omnivert or ambivert. And when we look at that as a way, as a lens for this listener's question, that it is so important, as you said, to know where you are on that spectrum.
Mhm.
I tend to be very introverted. I sometimes present as an extrovert. So when I do get out, I am more extroverted, but I need so much alone time in
Mhm.
order to get out that one or two times a month, not
Yeah.
a week, a month. And
Mhm.
then when I am out, because I'm a very empathic, sensitive introvert, it takes me so much time to process all of the emotions I picked up and everything that I saw and felt. And so it would make sense that if I weren't aware of that, I too might be drawn to self soothe or self anesthetize because the stimulation can be so intense. But I'm aware of my boundaries and my needs around that. And we can also see and probably a good thing to explain for our listeners, an introvert tends to get fueled by it's one of the ways to tell who's an introvert, who's an extrovert. The introvert tends to get fueled by alone time or time with one or two people. The extrovert tends to get fueled by time with other people and socializing, and they really need that. And so, as you wisely brought up, Lisa, this individual may have friends who are more extroverted. And if this individual's trying to keep up with them, it will be toxic for them.
Absolutely.
And so you said very wisely, find out what your social battery is
Mhm.
and respect it. Respect, that is such an important point. So, what else might you highlight for the listener's question on, the walls that they feel around them, that sense of being isolated? Because I know we have a big loneliness pandemic, right? Yes, absolutely. And we also, the US has fallen out of the top 20 countries that are the happiest for the first time in ages. And I
Mhm.
think there's an association there.
Yeah, I think there is. You're right. You're right. I think that I would say give yourself some grace. I feel like I'm saying that a lot lately in a
Mm.
lot of different situations, but I feel like it applies in this particular context, especially because I feel like a lot of us operate from a place, and I'm speaking of myself too, a lot of us operate from a place of reactivity, right? We get into a situation, let's take this person's particular situation where they go out in a social setting and they're overwhelmed and they feel like there's a barrier and they're not connecting with people. We just react to that. So we internalize what we believe to be a defect. We think, well, most people aren't like that. People can be out in public and can socialize, and what's wrong with me? I think that's what a lot of people tend to jump to, is that there's something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with someone who has a lower threshold for interaction. Like I was smiling a lot. I don't know if you noticed it when you were talking about yourself and about, kind of your own social media. And I'm laughing because I'm the same way. I've grown into much more of a solitary person as I've gotten older than I ever was before. And I think that a big part of that is because when we're younger, we're so conditioned to want to be part of everything and we don't want to miss anything. And there's this whole FOMO culture. I've been I've been embracing a whole new concept called JOMO. If people understand what FOMO is, which is fear of missing out, there's a whole new philosophy out there called JOMO, which is the joy of missing out, which is the joy of being able, it's all a reframe, right,
I
Carla?
love this.
It's just such a cool concept that for me has really taken any stress. And I'm speaking now directly to the person who asked you that question. Like that was a game changer for me when I started to think about my interactions and where I put myself and where I spent my time and who I spent my time with. Like you're allowed to discriminate. And I don't mean discriminate in a bad way. I mean in a personal way. Like
Mhm.
you're allowed to not respond, I'm going to the party or the function or the event. Like you can give yourself permission to not go. And it doesn't mean you're not a good friend. It doesn't mean you're not supportive. It doesn't mean you don't care. It just means that you reserve the right to decide where you want to spend your time, how you want to spend your time, and don't judge yourself for that. Don't beat yourself up because of that. Um, take allow yourself to take joy in choosing what you do and where you go and who you engage with. And once people kind of, it's all about how you frame and reframe things, right? It's about the whole, ugh, I have to get up and work out today, or it's you reframe it. Oh, I get to work out today and build my endurance and build my stamina and feel great about myself. So it depends on how we think about things. And I think if your listener who wrote in that question maybe gives themselves grace and thinks about it in terms of like, I'm more content to be in these situations, then they'll give themselves a little bit more of a license to enjoy them.
Absolutely. And I love the way you reframe it because it is so important to dive inside, find what's right for you, not compare yourself to others because we are all unique beings. And there are times we will want to be turning outwards, times where what's best for us to turn inward. And when we do that, I think it does really reduce anxiety. It reduces stress. It reduces that sense for many people of being depressed because they feel like they are broken. And exactly what you said, when we have that mantra in our head that I'm the odd person out, I'm broken. I do believe, and I love that image of the walls. Not that I like it for the person who wrote in, but I think it was expressed very well, because those walls for somebody who feels isolated and deficient all the time, when your friends are appearing one way and you feel like you're very different and you're trying to appear like them, boy, that's a road to nowhere quickly. And
Mhm.
I really appreciate that you brought up the piece about talking, sharing just a piece of how you're feeling, because I think this is such an important aspect, because many people will feel the same way this individual feels and say, I'm so glad you said that. I feel exactly that same way.
That's it. That's it. There's strength in that. Well, that right there, that's the foundation for community. That's how you build and grow community, is when you start sharing it. And now I'm talking about authenticity, I'm talking about vulnerability, I'm talking about sharing our stories, all of these these tools that we can use to kind of level, I don't want to say level the playing field, but I guess that's kind of what it is. It's fleshing out the reality that not everything is as it seems. There's a whole optics thing that exists within our relationship dynamics that I've learned in my lifetime. Take for instance, perfect example. Take a middle school age, high school age child who is experiencing that fear of being left out, or that pain of being left out, because they've seen all these parties and get-togethers that they didn't get invited to on social media, right? That look so amazing, and that they think everybody in the world was invited except for them. Well, those images, those I say in air quotes now, stories or events, narratives, those were curated to look a certain way. Those
Hmm.
are designed to look like it was the greatest thing that anybody's ever gone to. And of course you're going to feel bad that you weren't a part of it. But it's only when you look behind the curtain and you realize, well, wasn't that great, or not everybody was there, or it wasn't that big of a deal. That's when you realize how skewed things can be from the outside, and how much of an impact, a negative impact, those images can have when we don't know the full story.
Absolutely, and it's one of those pieces about that voice of toxic comparison, because the minute we start comparing ourselves and what's happening on in our lives with some airbrushed, carefully curated image, whatever it is, we don't know. And it's so tempting because we're human. I'm not on social media a whole lot, but every once in a while I'll see something and I'll go, oh, that looks lovely, and I wish I had gone to that or been invited to that. And then I just come back to me and say, no, you were
Yeah,
where you wanted to be because you were where you wanted to be, and that's right for you. Why are you longing for this? When really, if we create the life that we want, we end up being in the right place anyway, even if that's cuddled up with our puppy on the couch,
that's a
whatever it
great
is.
point. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think too few of us give ourselves that permission to be content doing what we're doing, because we feel that there's this external compulsion to do all the other things that either our friends or society or our community tells us we're supposed to be doing, or makes us believe that we're supposed to be doing. And I think therein lies the problem, the disconnect, the issue, whatever you want to call it. That's, I think, the foundation for all of these issues, because we're so conditioned to believe that we're supposed to do certain things and be a certain way, in terms of, and I'm speaking now in terms of like being social and being active and being part of community. Like who has the right to say that a life with a handful of close friends is any less meaningful than a life with a list of friends that is, 200 names deep? It doesn't, it's all relative. It doesn't matter. It's all, is it quantity versus quality? Like no one gets to decide that but us, but we forget that.
Thank you for bringing that up because the researcher, I think it's Dunbar, but I might be confusing him with somebody else because there's so much research roiling around in my brain. But anyway, really did this wonderful research that I think can fit perfectly here, where his research showed that we are able to have the human brain five intimate friends.
Mhm.
And if you have a romantic partner, that romantic partner takes up 1.5 of those people. And
Mhm.
then we have another sphere that might have, say, 10 people in it. And those are our friends, but it's much looser and we see them or we don't see them. And then it goes out in various degrees. And I think so many of us have come to believe that we should all have this big social network of 300 friends or 5,000 friends, because some people have that many friends, so to speak, on Facebook
Right.
or whatever. And I like to reframe it to intimate friends, friends, and
Mhm.
acquaintances. Because so many of the people that we are so-called friends with on Facebook, they don't know anything about us. We may have dated them at some point, or maybe they were a childhood friend, but they don't really know who we are. They don't know us through and through, or they may have known another version of who we were.
Right.
And so I think it's so important. I love how you said no one should be telling you, not yourself or other people, that you are better, more successful, more valuable because you have more friends.
Mhm.
And I think most of us are lucky if we have one, two, three really dear friends in our lives that we can count on. And that's what's priceless and precious. And I think when we cultivate those intimate friendships, we tend, because then they are with like-minded people who aren't going to pull us out to go
Mhm.
to a bar if we're not feeling like it, or to, run a marathon if we're really just wanting a walk around the park.
Right. Right.
So I think those intimate friendships are often a really big part of positive mental health. People that we can share our stories with, which is my lead into one of your fortes. You are a storyteller. Could
Mhm.
you tell us a little bit about the gift of storytelling?
Yeah, of course. So right now, as you mentioned earlier, I am a volunteer with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, and I go around. I'm here in Massachusetts, just north of Boston, and so I go around the state of Massachusetts and I share my story of losing my father to suicide with everyone who wants to hear it, with whether it be a civic organization or a school or a private group. It connects me with people on a grassroots level, on a very personal, very intimate, small group basis, where I can have a really open, honest conversation, safe conversation about my lived experience. This is not um, a clinical environment. This is purely an I'm sharing my story with you in the hopes that you connect with some part of it, all of it, um, maybe something that I've done to help myself over the years. It's kind of getting back to that, the original way that we all communicated with each other before we had all the bells and the whistles and the screens and the tablets and the technology. People would talk to each other. People would tell you in their own words what happened to them, how they navigated it, where it took them, and that's what I do. So I do that whenever I have the opportunity. That's more of like the classic storytelling experience, but I also tell stories in lots of different ways. I do it like you do it. I write books, tell different stories that way. I write a column and tell kind of a micro story every week in my columns, and a lot of content that shares little snippets of the different lived experiences that I've had, in the hopes of getting other people to do the same thing, because it's when we do that, we connect with people on that kind of a basic level. It encourages other people to do the same, to have them turn around and them share some aspect of their own personal story that, that could somehow benefits someone else. So it's kind of a domino effect. The hope is that it's a domino effect in that way.
I absolutely believe, which is why I had talked about the group therapy,
Mhm.
because that is, as you're describing, it's an ancient way
Mhm.
of supporting positive mental health. We, we didn't have phones 100 years ago or 50 years ago where people were staring at a screen for hours at a time. We were staring into the eyes of another person. We were staring into the stars, into the trees. We were, staring into connection.
Mhm.
Now we spend so much of our days, for people who are really hyper connected, we're staring into something that doesn't see us. It's a computer screen. It's not showing us anything human back in a really palpable way. And what could be more lonely than that? What could be more loneliness inducing than spending the bulk of your day looking at something that's lifeless?
Yeah.
So, as you can tell, I'm not a I'm a bit of a Luddite at heart. So,
Yeah, and you know what? And I think we could all benefit from being a little bit more like that, to be honest with you. Because look, while we can't argue that there has been a lot of good that's come out of all of our technological advancements, there's no way to dispute that. But it's also had a lot of negative effects too. And you look at just you look at kids who are missing out on so much of their lives and so much of their relationships and interactions. Kids who don't know how to answer the telephone. They don't know how to talk on the telephone. They don't know how to carry on a conversation and maintain eye contact with someone. I mean, these little things, these little life skills are being lost. So I think we could all benefit from kind of a global movement to get back to a place where we connect with each other directly. And I think that especially in terms of our mental health and where we're going, because we've just moved from one pandemic into another pandemic. We're
mhm.
in this, this medical pandemic, and now we're in this mental health pandemic. And I think that one of the main ways that we find our way back or out of it is to really just start connecting with each other in a different way than we have been for a long time.
Absolutely, because for thousands and thousands of years, humans connected with each other face to face, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart. And it's only in the last, couple of decades that we have moved away from that. And it's an abrupt and toxic shift. And it's interesting that you brought up the little ones, because when I go on my morning walks, you can see there are some parents that are walking with their kiddos and talking about the nature and this and that. And other one where a 2-year-old has their own phone face down into the screen, whatever it is, and not judging it, but we know the long-term effects. We're wondering why we're seeing more ADHD. Well, it's because we're giving our kids so much of this reinforcement of these little bits get really distracted, and pull back, rather than being in a place where there's it's much less likely to, feel hyperactive if you're looking in somebody else's eyes and talking and connecting and engaging with other people. Might have
Mhm.
to be much more present for longer periods of time. Oh my goodness, Lisa, I could talk to you for ages. Um, We'll have to have you back to talk more
Yes,
about
absolutely.
suicide and grief and loss, because I know that is one of your specialties, because it's very real and personal to you. And that's often the very best place to come from, because there's such wisdom in lived experience. But thank you so much for blessing us with your grace, your beauty, your energy today. I'm so grateful. Are there any other pieces, before you can share where listeners find you? Is there any other pieces that you think it's important for us to be able to offer this listener to, really flesh out more of the question of the day, or?
I think I would go back to something that I had said earlier and really just reiterate it strongly and tell them directly, just give yourself some grace. Meet yourself exactly where you are right now and put your energy into surrounding yourself with people who are going to bring out the best in you, who are going to support you, who are going to be there to embrace you in whatever way that you show up. Don't worry about being what you think people want to see from you. Worry about being exactly who you are and finding a place where you can do that in a safe way.
Thank you for emphasizing that. It's a perfect point and a huge point because you had talked a little bit earlier about agoraphobia. And when we don't listen
Mhm.
to that inner voice, that's where issues like agoraphobia, that fear of just leaving home, fear of going anywhere can really surface. So I add to that, yes, listen to what you need, whatever you need. When you're listening to what your body, mind, and spirit want, you can't go wrong. And if you
Yeah.
need help finding out what your body, mind, and spirit want, get some support because sometimes we've become so far removed that what seems simple to a clinician, someone who does it every day, doesn't mean that it's simple for you, our listener, and that we don't expect that. You may need some help just to find out, well, what is I didn't even know who I am. What's really right for me? I've been there, so I know precisely when I was, younger, I didn't know what was right for me. I think I felt it, but it was so socialized to do what everyone else wanted that I had to go back and get help. So I understood, oh, what does Carla want? What is
Yeah.
right for her? It's not what's right for everyone else. So thank you for emphasizing that and for sharing your life, your story with us, just a bit of it. And where can our listeners find you?
Well, everything that I do, everywhere that I am, is really funneled into my website. You can go to lisasugarman.com. All of my books are there. My column archives are there. All of the mental health resources that I've curated and tools I've curated live there. My YouTube channel funnels in there as well. And just everything that I put out into the world. I mean, I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook and all those little social spaces and places, but you can find them all at lisasugarman.com.
Thank you. And listeners, her website is fabulous. And don't miss the toolkit section. Don't miss her book section. She has great books on parenting. So much. You just have such a wealth of experience and wisdom to share. So I appreciate it. So thank you, Lisa, for being with us today. It's been such a joy and a pleasure.
Oh, thanks, Carla. I appreciate you having me. This was just such a beautiful conversation, and I'm already excited for the next one.
Yes, so thank you. And thank you to our listeners for sharing your time with us. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.